You've brought up the election a few times, so I do want to talk about the election. I want to play a clip from the last time that you were here. You mentioned, you brought up voter fraud, so I want to play that, and then we'll get into the election. Are you confident that the appropriate measures are being taken at the state level to protect the integrity of the election?
No, I'm very concerned. I mean, we know tens of thousands of potential voter fraud occurred when I ran for governor and lost by 30,000 votes. We know that if there aren't election judges in some Chicago precincts, there'll be 110% turnout by 2 in the afternoon. When there's election judges, they don't get to 40%.
I want to follow up on that because at the time we didn't talk much about it, but the Brennan Center for Justice talked about several studies that were done. A comprehensive study in 2014 that was published found 31 credible instances of fraud from 2000 to 2014 out of more than 1 billion ballots that were cast. A study published by Columbia University Political Science tracked incidence of rates for voter fraud for 2 years and found that the rare fraud that was reported generally could be traced to false claims by the loser of a close race, mischief, and administrative or voter error. While writing a 2012 book, a researcher went back 30 years to try to find an example of voter impersonation or fraud determining the outcome of an election, but was unable to find even one. Do you still think that there were thousands of voters who committed fraud in Chicago?
Yeah, but no question in my mind. And it comes by talking to people. That incident I talked about, a precinct came from an election judge who was in the precinct in the Chicagoland area. And he said the year before, by 2 o'clock, they had over 100% turnout. And because they were challenging people as they came in to prove their identity, the turnout was less than, I think, 60%. So there's no question that we have to do everything we can. Anytime there's a fraudulent vote, it reduces the value of a legitimate vote. And there's too much opportunity for it in Illinois, whether it be by voting absentee and not sending it in until the very last minute and then going and showing up at the precinct on election day. But there is too much opportunity, and my goal is to eliminate fraud, and that would preserve the value of everyone's vote, which is very important.
So do you think these studies overlooked voting in Illinois?
Well, I think I'd have to look at the studies. You're quoting studies that I can't reference, but I truly believe that particularly in the Chicagoland area, we've all heard the jokes about what happens up there, but it is something that needs to be seriously looked into to preserve the value, which is why I've supported in the past identification. If someone votes fraudulently, it diminishes the value of your vote, and that's not right.
I would agree with you on that case, but I mean, there aren't even, if there were thousands of people voting fraudulently, there would have been plenty of news stories about it. There aren't news stories about thousands.
It's very hard to detect. And I remember when I ran for governor, the evidence indicated there were thousands of it, but the only solution, because we vote anonymously, was to declare a new election, which would be not realistic, okay? So what we have to do is to try to preserve the integrity of the system. And whether there's one fraudulent vote or thousands of fraudulent votes, I think we owe it to every voting citizen to protect the integrity of that system.
Well, then why aren't you making a bigger deal of this right now? If we know, as we do, that there was Russian interference in Illinois' voter system, why aren't you making a bigger deal at the federal level to protect the integrity of our voting systems when we know that we have an election coming up in just a few months?
Well, I have introduced legislation to protect and preserve the integrity of the system in Illinois. I don't know that much about what you're referring to in terms of Russian interference, other than what you and I both read in the news media. I haven't heard about any voter fraud in terms of Russian interference, but maybe there is. But regardless of which party, is doing it, using it, it needs to be preserved. And hacking systems should be against the law.
Which it is, but we know that Illinois' system has been violated.
Which system?
The voter registration system has been penetrated by Russia. That
Okay,
was...
you're telling me something that I'm not up to speed on, so you may well be right. And if it's been violated, it's incumbent upon us to preserve the integrity through law, rule, or policies, and go after those violators. You're absolutely right.
Now we don't know to what end, and certainly votes weren't changed. We know that votes weren't manipulated, but we don't know to what end that had happened.
Diligence and investigation is important.
So do you think enough focus has been put on that?
My focus has been on making sure that you have a right to vote, you exercise that right only once, and we do everything we can to preserve that, like some other states have done.
So putting aside this voter integrity issue, which I think we have recognized that you think there are issues, and as you said, you have led legislation to that end to protect the integrity of the system. The fact that lawmakers now can go into this election cycle with as we talked about, a bipartisan balanced budget. The governor obviously is running on this bipartisan balanced budget, doing so as you mentioned earlier, with no new taxes, but he is also doing so with the tax hike that was approved last year. Obviously it's a very nasty race between the governor and J.B. Pritzker. Do you feel comfortable with the governor running on this budget, knowing that he did have to accept the tax hike that was passed, but by also saying that there are no new taxes?
I do. I think the governor led on providing a balanced budget that helped invest in our children. Over $350 million in this budget for education, not to mention the monumental education reform package we passed last summer. He's got a lot to run on. Would I like to reduce the tax burden because we believe it's better for families and grows jobs? Absolutely. That's why this election is so important. This election will be not only about the next 4 years, but maybe about the next map. See, I personally believe that Illinois legislatively is a Republican state in terms of the identity of the voters. But when the Madigan machine has the opportunity to gerrymander a map, by the way, that Bruce Rauner, and frankly I won a majority of the House and Senate seats against Pat Quinn, it shows you how manipulated it is when you've got such a lopsided Democratic control. So Bruce Rauner not only will lead the next 4 years, but he'll have the ability to preside over a fair map for Illinois. I believe under a fair map, Republicans, particularly downstaters will have more of a voice in Springfield than what they've had through the Madigan-Chicago dominance that has put policies in place that have increased the tax burden on Illinois families, that have reduced economic opportunities. That's what Bruce Rauner's fighting for. There's a lot more to accomplish. J.B. Pritzker's fighting for higher taxes and more Chicago politics. Bruce Rauner's fighting for lower taxes on families and businesses and job growth, educational opportunity. And I think he's proven that in the first 3 years of his term. Last question.
Representative Ives obviously gave Governor Rauner a very tough run in the primary, and you are a supporter of Governor Rauner. Do you have a concern about Senator McCann?
I don't. I think he's trying to be a spoiler. I don't think that'll work for him. I'm pro-life. I disagreed with Governor Rauner's vision on HB 40. I think many Republicans and independents will respect an individual's ability to make a decision, but look for what the better future of Illinois is. And that's what Governor Rauner stands for. Lower taxes, investing in education for the future of our next generation. And those are big differences between the scandals that go on in Chicago politics and what's been playing in Illinois. Governor Rauner fights for the entire state. Republicans will come, I think, home to that, even after what was a divisive primary. I had to make a choice about who I thought was better for the better good of Illinois, and that's Bruce Rauner.
All right. The Republican leader of the Senate is Bill Brady. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. We very much appreciate it.
Good to be with you.